welcome everyone to the Capital Mind podcast. If you'd like to know more about us, visit capitalmind.in. And if you'd like to invest with us, do visit capitalmindwealth.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as the basis for investment decisions. Clients of Capital Mind may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 58 of the Capital Mind podcast. In today's episode, we reflect on what has in many ways been India's year. We are among the best, or perhaps the best performing meaningful stock market in the world, and Deepak feels that Indian domestic interest and foreign attention now create the opportune moment to create the concept of a retirement account, which he goes on to label the MERA account, to help improve investment opportunities for retail customers, create a longer-term investing horizon, longer than the 1 and 3 years we currently play with in India, and push people to save for their retirements in a more meaningful way. Do listen in to learn more about this concept of a tax-deferred account and how it might make sense for all of us. Hi Deepak. Well, thanks for doing this, I guess our last episode for the month of December and for the year. And I was just thinking back, it's been quite a year, right? And in many ways, it's been a good year for India. 2021 was a fairly unpleasant one for all of us with COVID, the second wave and so on. And the start of this year looked ominous too, with I think Omicron spreading everywhere and markets correcting for a bit. But at the end of it, India looks in relatively good shape. And I think that's one of the reasons you wanted to record today's episode on a slightly longer term topic like retirement accounts and retirement planning in that sense. But first, your take. It has been a very good year for India in some ways, right?
It has, Shray. It's been in best performing stock market in the world, I think. Indonesia was better as of end of November, but that seems to have fallen about 10% since. So we are officially one of the best performing economy on a 1 year period, at least right now. And, it's interesting because it's like 7 consecutive positive years now. And inflation seems to be much lower than when we began, which is roughly, I think, 2015 or 2013 was about 9% inflation. Now we're looking at 5.8 as recently as as November. So much about India itself has evolved in the last few years. And I think it's also time we start thinking that we are actually becoming a developed country and therefore we should adopt some of the things that they did simply because as they matured, they got more and more people into the financial parts of the economy rather than trying to invest and buy 5 houses or multiple houses, trying to make money off of rent. You should actually have financial investments like deposits or bonds or stocks rather than doing real estate or gold kind of investments. It's probably a good time to step back because the world has stepped back and they have been in turmoil because they're dealing with inflation. India seems to be in a better place because we know how to deal with inflation. So maybe it's best now that we should do the exact right things that they set themselves up for when they started off. And they got like a 20-25 year bull run or an economic bull run more than a stock market one. And that, that's just helped them now because they're in so much of a stronger position compared to us. So it's time that we probably step back and do something for our future as well.
Seize the opportunity. And you're saying seize the opportunity with an unlikely candidate. You're saying retirement accounts, kind of inspired by the US 401k. So could you talk about this more? Why are retirement accounts so important?
This is actually the strangest thing I read. I think I wrote about it about a few years back and we'll link it in the show notes. Retirement accounts, before I come to why I think India deserves one, let's look at what retirement accounts mean for the rest of the world. I think one of the things that is actually quite prevalent is that people use their savings to build wealth for their own retirement over the long term. They are pushed to do so by creating innovative tax deferred accounts. Now we'll come to that later, but why they're interesting is because they're one of the largest sources of market penetration in the whole world. It's not just in India. Now, if I look at just US stock market cap, it's about $36 trillion. 36 trillion is, it used to be 40, now it's $36 trillion. Now, if you look at just the 401k, which is one of the types of retirement accounts that are there in the US, that's about $7 trillion US dollars, which is 17 to 20% of the US market cap. I know that 401ks don't invest only in the US, but I'm just saying let's compare it to the US market cap. Because you're talking about 17 to 20% in one type of account, which is a 401k. There's something called IRAs, individual retirement accounts. They have 11.5 trillion. So that's like more than 30%, in fact, of the total market cap of the US. Of that, if you look at just all the retirement types of accounts put together, mostly tax-deferred retirement accounts, these add up to roughly 53% of US market cap. If you use that US stock market cap as a base, then roughly half of the US market cap is accounted for by just retirement funds like IRAs and 401ks. In India, if you take our market cap, which is 220 lakh crores, let's say 220 trillion rupees is 220 lakh crores. The EPFO, which is one of the largest retirement accounts in India, is about 14 lakh crores, just 7% of Indian market cap. And this is just 14 lakh crores. This is not a significantly large number. No. ELSS, which is this tax saving fund concept, is about 0.5%. PPF is another 0.5%. Rest of it added up is, very marginal in comparison, maybe 1 or 2%. NPS, which is the new pension scheme, largely used by government employees, that's about 8 lakh crores. So you add all of this up, you might say we're about maybe 8 or not. I mean, this would add up to about 8 or 9% of GDP of stock market cap. I'm going to compare it to stock market cap itself. Of stock market cap itself, because reason I'm not comparing it to GDP is GDP is a flow number. This is a stock number. So we should compare it to something else that's a stock number. The stock number is a market cap. And so if you look at that, we are about 8-9% in actual retirement accounts. You can say that, okay, insurance is a potentially 40-45 lakh crore rupees is like retirement. I say yes, but there are complications because much of it is insurance, much of it is long-term saving, and much of it is just people trying to save for inheritance and all that stuff. Still, that is about 40 lakh crores. That's about 20% of GDP, maybe little less than 20% of GDP. And if you add all this up, it probably adds to less than 30% of GDP in total, even if you consider insurance to be a long-term, retirement-ish kind of saving. The main problem over here is, look at, let's say Australia, for instance. Australia's superannuation accounts are 143% of their market cap, which is huge, because they don't invest only in Australia, they invest in other countries as well. So it's effectively a very large stock measure for most Western developed countries. The UK has a very weird concept of pensions where they guarantee pensions, which is why the problems in some of these leveraged pension instruments came about recently. I would say that's more a problem of the UK than it is for the rest of the world. But in general, I would say people who have the flexibility to invest in retirement accounts and through retirement accounts are large portions of long-term money that comes into both stock and bond and government bond markets in the rest of the world. In India, it's tiny. Now, basically, if you look at Indian investments, LIC, 80%, 85% of their AUM sits in debt, which is either government debt or state government debt or something like that. More than 80% of NPS probably sits in government debt or state government debt. Again, this is tiny stuff. ELSS is probably the only thing but again, we know that that's tiny. So if you look at this, even our 30% of GDP, about 10 or 15% of it is actually retirement money. This would this does not really move the needle for equity investments. And also remember that debt just gives you roughly inflation returns. So if you take inflation returns are coming from debt and most of your money is sitting in debt, where do you get this more than inflation return on retirement funds? The answer is currently nowhere. So where we were in the last 30 years was fine because debt was giving us great returns. Debt was giving us 8%, 7% returns. And inflation, actually realized inflation for most people tends to be a little bit lower than that. So people were kind of happy. What's going to happen going forward is that debt will not give those kind of returns because inflation will come down. Look at what's happened this year. RBI has raised rates 3 times in the last 4 months. And yet, the 10-year bond yield, which was 7.5, has actually fallen to 7.3. It's in fact, most of the longer-term bond yields are below 7.5%. Even despite the fact that RBI has raised rates, because the bond market is expecting that in the longer term, India's inflation control will supersede everything else and our long-term rates will come down. Long-term returns, if they fall less than 8%, this is an interesting turning point because the US did this in the 1980s. 401k as an account started in the 1980s. 401k as an account actually came about as a tax law that simply said your employers could pay you money and that money would not be taxed in your name, similar to how your EPF works right now. That money is not taxed in your name until you actually take the money out whenever you do. And people started adopting it big time. In the US, in the late 70s and 80s, you had very high interest rates. So you had very high returns on government bonds. But come 1984 or so is when you suddenly started to see that the government bond yields started to fall below, I think 7-8% and started to fall much, much lower than that. As that happened, the retirement funds in general and the fact that there was a 401k, there was a IRA and all that which had flexibility, started to see more movement into equity. So people who are retiring now are probably benefiting from that massive bull cycle that they've seen in equity, but much of that bull cycle was also pushed through. Remember when 401k started, it was probably 1 or 2%. Today it's 8% of the US market cap. A large part of that is invested in US stocks itself. So there is a fairly good correlation within the fact that the economy improved, the 401k contributions increased. Those 401k contributions were invested in equity. The returns that they got from those equity investments beat inflation over the long term and therefore made a lot of people a reasonable sum of money as they were investing in the 401ks. Long-term returns in India are starting to fall below 8%. I think they will go towards the 4 or 5% which is where inflation is likely to end up. We are going to see this flexible inflection point. Now, you might ask me that, listen, Deepak, we're anyway going and giving our money to NPS and LIC and all of these things. But I will tell you this. This is not the best thing in the world. One of the reasons why I feel there's a problem here is we are giving asset managers money and telling them, oh, this is long-term money, go do great things. But they're not doing great things. We are getting very conservative asset managers for what is actually long-term money. So the asset managers themselves are saying, listen, this is Deepak Shenoy. He can take a lot more risk. Can we put his money more into equity? No, they're not making the decision. They don't even know who Deepak Shenoy is. They're mostly saying, listen, we are investing for people's retirement, so we should be careful with that money. This attitude, even though they have locked in money for long periods, causes massive underperformance. And perhaps, for instance, we actually, if I were to increase I wanted my retirement money to be invested in equity, there are very few options that I can do. I can't tell LIC to put my insurance money into equity, for instance. LIC will do its own thing. NPS, I have a little bit of a choice, but it's only about 50%. With EPFO, I don't have any choice. They decide it's 10% or 15%. I cannot realize my larger risk appetite in any meaningful way, and the managers themselves aren't great. They're not doing they don't seem to be doing the right things for long-term investors.
Now, that one is surprising because I always thought the conventional wisdom, which at least I've heard in this office as well, is that ELSS funds, as a proxy for these fund managers, end up doing better than, let's call it, the corresponding flexi cap or fund from the same house because, well, they have the money in for longer periods of time. I mean, at least that's what I had heard. Do you not see that being the case?
I think, this is where, in theory, this is correct, but in practice, it's not. But it's coming to... It actually shocked me, for instance. When we started looking this up and I had this theory that they were HDFC Flexi Cap over the last 5 years. And you would assume 5 years is a fairly reasonable time. Has returned 14%. HDFC Tax Saver, this fund from the same house, which is supposed to have had this money for locked in for 3 years and therefore they're super flexible on what they can do, returns 10%. 4% below their own Flexi Cap fund. Aditya Birla. The Flexi Cap Fund is 11.5%. Again, 11.5% is less than the index, which is given 14, by the way. But Aditya Birla Tax Saver is 7.2, roughly half of what the index is given and 4% below their own Flexi Cap Fund. Even an SBI, which is a fairly reasonably performing tax saver fund, the tax saver fund is done 11.8%. The flexi cap is on 11.7%. Now you would assume that you'd get at least more than this 0.1% outperformance. And remember this at a time when the index is given you 14. So even basically SBI both have done badly in a way. IDFC seems to be doing better. They have given maybe 13% or 14% in their tax saver fund, but they've only done better because their flexi cap fund has been horrible and they've given only 9% returns. So in a way, isn't this saying that, oh, you have a great set of managers for your flexi cap funds, or not great, well, better set of managers for your flexi cap fund, but not better for your, or sometimes it's the same fund manager. It's the same fund manager that manages both funds. And yet you get lousier returns on the tax saver fund, which are supposed to be locked longer term, compared to what you're doing. So why are we denoting funds as tax saver versus flexi cap? Why can't I have a retirement account in which I choose the funds that I invest in? It sounds. Why can't you give me the large cap or flexi cap funds to choose from, so that I can choose the asset manager that's most efficient, rather than you choosing, telling the fund that you can create a tax saving fund, and that seems to, even though that's locked in, it seems to be better. Or let me even choose index funds, for instance, if I'm that kind of a person. Most importantly, this is where the problem is. For the most part, we're investing with post-tax money.
Is that true? I mean, isn't this like LSS and all? You get the ATC exemption, right? So is it really post-tax money?
So here's the interesting part. I think it's pre-tax money for a very few set of people. Your EPF contribution is deductible against ATC. ATC is 1.5 lakhs per year. Now, if you're investing 12% of your salary, that means if you get a salary of like 1,20,000 rupees per month, which is about 14 lakhs per year. 14 lakhs per year, 1,20,000 rupees per month, then that 1,20,000 rupees ka 15%, 12% goes into EPF. That's all that is deductible. That means this would apply for someone who's fairly young and they make the 1,50,000 there. But guess what? The same limit applies for insurance. So if you take insurance in your name for 1 crore rupees, because you got to protect your income for at least 1 crore if you're making 14 lakhs a year, you're going to pay about 30,000 rupees or 25,000 rupees in insurance. That falls under the same limit. So the available limit for NPS falls to 1,25,000. So if you're paid 25 in insurance, only 1,25,000 of the NPS is or the EPFO is considered. So literally this limit of 1.5 lakh rupees, which hasn't gone up in like 15 years, has no opportunity for you to have invested more into your own retirement in the longer term. Your employer's contributions, of course, are tax free. So in EPS, employee provident fund alone, but that doesn't help a lot of people who want to save for their retirement, like small business people, small companies, where the company contribution is not so much, and so on. These limits haven't changed for 10 years. This ELSS limit, why hasn't it changed for 10 years? Because the government doesn't want it. It's a pain to administer. And remember this, okay? Some elements of the ATC deduction are actually like things like your children's education fees. Your children's education fees are super important, because if you educate your children, you build greater things for the economy and so on. So but today, if you have 2 children, you're paying 75,000 rupees a year, which is pretty much urban fees for most people. More than that, in fact. So you end up with nothing left for your ELSS, NPS, all of these other retirement funds. They all are going with post-tax money. That means any investments you're making into these long-term retirement funds are post-tax money. However, the reason why they want to tax you on the way in, and the government is very clear about this, they want to tax you before they they let you put money into insurance or anything like that, apart from this 1,50,000, is that on the way out you're not taxed. EPFO is not taxed on the way out. When you take the money out, 0% is taxed. PPF has no tax on the way out or on accruals. LIC has no way. Insurance has no tax on the way out. ELSS does have a capital gains tax, but ELSS is locked in only for 3 years. It's not for really long terms. NPS also has a non-taxable component, in the sense whatever you take, you can take 60% of it tax-free, 40% has to go into an annuity, but the annuity returns are taxed. Essentially, for most of your income at the time you take it out is not taxed. So they want to tax it on the way in. Perfectly fair. But I would say this is equivalent to some of the older IRAs in the US until 401k. Now, I think we should do something very dramatically different. I should say, enter pre-tax. Don't tax the money on when it comes into your investment, a long-term investment retirement portfolio. Allow you to control where your money is invested. That means it's invested in a mutual fund or whatever else and all that stuff. Complete granular control over it. And we'll talk about the operational aspects of it later, operational complexities of it, and how it's become very simple now. And as soon as you take out money, even if you take out 1 rupee, it is taxed as income, not as capital gains, but it should be taxed as income to you on the way out.
So you had me till the last one. How is this possibly a good idea? Why would we want to do this?
So, firstly, of course, the reason is it's like basically you're deferring your income tax, you're not actually saving, you're not doing capital gains. So it's like everything that you should have been taxed on now, any returns on that will be taxed as income. It's just that you're deferring your income to a later date. So it's taxed as income. But remember, on the exit part, you're probably at a much lower slab and you're on a much lower taxable slab. So for a majority of people, what will happen is when you start taking the money out, you'll be at a 20, 22, 23% slab, which will be a much more affordable slab than the 35, 40% that you might be paying today. So when you exit, you might be paying 20, 22%. When you enter, you might have paid 35%. Now, why is this good? It's good. I'll tell you that it's good both for the government and for the individual. There's a reason for this. If you invest 100 rupees today and it grows to 200 in, say, some years, 8 years, 9, some at 9%. If you tax the 100 rupees today, you'll get 35% of it as tax because this person is paying 35%. The government gets 35 rupees and the individual is left with 65. This 65 doubles in the same time frame. You're getting 130 rupees and that 130 rupees, let us say, is tax free for whatever reason. So that 130 rupees is what is available to the individual at the end of this term and he's already paid 35% rupees as tax. But if you let that 100 itself pre-tax, not get taxed at all, make it grow to 200, the government will then take 20-22% of it, which is roughly 40 to 45 rupees. The individual is left with 145 rupees, which is greater than the 130 that he has. So the individual is way better off by order of 10-15%. But also the government is better off because earlier it collected 35 rupees in tax today. And later it's collecting 40-45 rupees in taxes. So, and also, by the way, the government has actually seen investment come into the economy. So most likely it's collecting tax from all the stuff that the investment has developed into the first place. And it may be bonds, it may be roads, it may be a bunch of other things. The government effectively makes you invest now. And we should change this in the sense of instead of this 1.5 lakh rupee limit, it should be a 15 lakh rupee per year limit on this. The concept is you can invest 15 lakh rupees a year into a retirement account. This retirement account will invest in whatever. It can't be in cash. It has to be invested somewhere. You get like a month or so for that. The minute you keep this money into that retirement account, the money is withdrawn from your income. And you can get a 15 lakh rupee per year limit per person for this kind of a strategy. The idea of 15 lakh rupees is that it's not actually saving you. It's not like, it's not like an ATC limit. It's a special limit for investments into this. And remember that is deferment of income. So you're actually taxed on the way out. So the government is actually not losing the tax, it's just deferring the tax out.
This is, well, much bigger. I mean, 10x, so I guess that might as well come out swinging. But, I mean, can you talk us through a bit about how this would work and what would you call it? I mean, how would you describe this?
This, of course, I talked about earlier, but now I think it's happened more to, we now have the digital infrastructure to make this completely viable without any holes. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we call this MERA. Because it's Indian, MERA is, I know it's a little Hindi, but it's fine. MERA is a word that everybody understands. MERA means my empowered retirement account. And why is it empowered?
It's a good name.
So it's an interesting way to put it. And, empowered is because you are not paying income tax on this amount when it gets in. You are allowed to determine where this account goes, and I'll talk about how. Effectively, you can defer the tax until, either you take the money out or if you're next of kin, I'll talk about that. But it empowers you to make those decisions for yourself according to your own risk appetite. And if you don't have any understanding of this, there's a standardized allocation that can still go. We also need to ensure that this MERA account does not get rich people to dump all their money here and not pay income tax, all their income here and not. For instance, if somebody makes a ton of money, 10 crores in salaries, takes the 10 crores and puts it all into this retirement account, the income tax department is going to be, hello, you can't do this. I mean, I understand you want to defer your tax, but you can't do this endlessly. The answer to whether you can or you cannot should be the limit of 15 lakhs per year. The limit of 15 lakhs per year can double every, say, 8 years or 10 years. So every 10 years by natural. So 2023, if we start 2033, it's going to increase from 15 lakhs to 30 lakhs. So we could, fine tune this. But the point over here is you would actually help the economy, because if you reduce your income by a certain amount, that means you can only do it if you have income of 15 lakhs per year. That means if I earn 5 lakhs and I try to put 15 lakhs into this from my previous savings, I don't get like this 10 lakh negative buffer that I can use for another year or something. It's not a loss. So it's like only up to how much ever income you've made. What is interesting is if 1 crore people, there are 1 crore people in India who make more than 15 lakhs per year. I'm giving an assumption of, and if this limit is met by those 1 crore people, that's 15 lakh crores per year that would go into such funds. Let's say I'm bullshitting my way here and it's only 50 lakh people that can actually afford this, or even 30 lakh people that can afford this. That is still 5 to 7 lakh crores per year. Remember, all of NPS put together for the last 20 years has added up to only 7 lakh crores. We could, in this one fell swoop, get 5 to 7 lakh crores per year into long-term investments using this. Now, what are long-term investments? It's not like an NPS. It's not, you shouldn't have asset managers specifically for your retirement funds. You should choose any asset manager that you like. You want to invest in mutual funds? Go ahead. You want to invest in stocks? Go ahead. Now, we can fix this. How can we do this? There is something called custodial accounts. Custodial accounts are DP accounts and bank accounts together, which are managed by a person called a custodian.
We have them in our PMS, right?
We do. We have it in our PMS, and all mutual funds and FIIs, they all use custodians. The idea here is the custodian is responsible for safekeeping of the funds in the bank account, and they take a power of attorney on your bank account, they take a power of attorney on your demat account, and the demat account and bank account are intrinsically linked. So anything that you buy in the demat account, sale proceeds of that go to the bank account and so on. Custodians know how to handle this. If you created a system called the MERA custodial account, the MERA custodial account will be a demat and a bank account together. These are linked. That means you buy something in the demat account. Let's say you buy a government bond. The interest payments of those government bonds flow into the bank account linked to that demat account. It's not taxed either, because you're only taxed on the way out. Anything that happens in the intermediary does not get taxed at all. So you get interest. That interest can be reinvested. It can be invested into equity. You should be able to buy anything that goes into a regular DP account, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, but no private stocks, no unlisted securities, no F&O, no foreign securities. if you're going through a custodian, now how do you buy these things? Typically, you'd use a broker. But my point is, maybe you don't even need the broker. I don't think there is no concept of leverage here. There's no margining. You can only use the funds in your bank account the minute they are. Since if the money is there is no margining risk at all. Why can't custodians directly or stock exchanges open a window for this, for custodians to open up trading to their customers, where the funds will be directly traded, the stocks will be directly traded on the stock exchange or bonds or so on, without any brokerage or any broker coming in the middle, because it's not needed. The brokers only needed to ensure that the margining is in place and all that. So there's no concept of margining here. You can be a direct to stock exchange mechanism with one less player to risk. So you don't risk that your broker goes bust. It doesn't matter that your broker goes bust, because the custodian is the custodian going bust is a less and it's a more regulated function. So by the way, one of India's biggest custodians, ILFS, went bust, and nobody even felt the difference in the custodial part of the relationships. They felt the difference in the F&O broking part of the relationship, but not one murmur was heard in terms of custodial accounts having lost anything. So we have a very robust infrastructure. Why would this be great for everybody? Is you have less people to deal with. You can deal directly with a custodial account. You could have an intermediary for this who's specially created. So a broker, for instance, could create a platform, or a third party can create a platform, but this third party does not even need to be a broker. It can be a set of APIs to custodians and sit on top of this entire function with a small, not percent of transaction, but a percent per year as an asset management fee. Not even an asset management fee. It's more like a custodial fee that will sit on top of what's there. And what's interesting is any withdrawals of this account should have a TDS, a tax deducted source, of 20%, not 10%. The reason for that is, listen, you got to pay this tax anyway. It's like tax on income. I'm assuming that you're going to pay 20%. If you pay less, then please recover the money from the income tax department by filing, it'll take a year or so. And you should have a 20% tax deducted source, because this will nudge you to not withdraw early. The minute you say, I want to withdraw 100 rupees, you'll get only 80 rupees in your bank account, because if you take the money out of that bank account, which is linked to and this is an account in your name, so you can take money out whenever you want, except whenever you take a request to take money out, 20% is deducted as TDS and given to the government. So if you put 100 rupees and try to take the same 100 rupees out, you would actually get only 80 rupees back. It's just the way of the game. It's that 100 rupees that went in was tax-free. The 100 rupees that came out has 20% TDS. That's so it's assumed to be your income at the time that the money came out. Now, this is massive, because over time, and 5, 7, 10, 15 lakh crores per year can come in. But over time, we can increase our investments, our retirement account balances to as much as 50% of GDP, 50% of, even market cap.
So, Deepak, I get the nuts and bolts part. I mean, that did make sense. And the idea of perhaps not using a broker, this is something I've heard online before. And it could, as you said, reduce the intermediaries, maybe bring down costs a bit, maybe at least prevent you from having exposure to salespeople and all that. So, all that I get. But from a policy angle or from a country point of view, I guess, if you're like being the finance minister or something, I mean, why does this matter so much? I mean, we already have these fairly large SIPs going so much. Why do we care if these, these mutual funds or these stocks, people are investing more in them? Is that something we really want to encourage or want to have happen?
Yeah, that's an important point, because I think our institutions to a large extent have failed us, right? So they've given us only 8% returns when your economy has grown at much more in a nominal basis and so on. But I think India has a lot of pressure to not invest, and there's various reasons for that. Or if you invest, you want something to be withdrawable in 3 years. You want to be withdrawable tax-free and all of that stuff. I think the concept is, yes, you can withdraw whenever you like. But do it only in an emergency, because you're going to lose 20% TDS. When you really want the money, that's anyway income in your name. So you can make this income flow to you with 20% TDS whenever you like. This is a great concept for most people in the long term, and this should not be restricted only to employees like EPFO is. We don't have an EPF account, or we don't, because we don't have enough employees right now to qualify for it. But even small businessmen, they don't get any retirement kind of tax deferred accounts of any meaningful sort for themselves, right? So I think you should even out that field. India is an entrepreneurial country. We should have more people trying to do this. The government will eventually make a lot more money through this route. And remember that India, people don't do two things. First, they don't do organized charity. For maybe reasons are like, people will misuse this. It's true also. We wrote a post about how some particular charity was spending more than 70% of its money that it received as earnings from Indian people, on just the marketing efforts of it. So we do feel that, why should I give 100 rupees to charity, on organized charity? Because, so we don't do that. It's the inherent mistrust in the system. But the same way, we don't do investments of a long-term nature. We don't do 10-year or 15-year investments unless we're very sure. So what happens is certain things do take 10, 15 years. These building a road and making it happen, making it earn its keep for the government, takes at least a 10 to 15-year cycle. Long distance projects, whether it's a hotel, it's a mall, each of these things has a long gestation period. And to a certain extent, these long-rated projects, whether they're airports and all, they're all funded by banks. They're not funded in any meaningful way by either equity or debt from retail or even from institutions. Even the long-term institutions have failed for the most part, whether it's IDBI, which eventually had to go to IDBI Bank, ICICI, which became ICICI Bank. The banks themselves find it difficult to handle long-term projects because they don't have long-term liabilities, and nobody gives 10-year deposits. Almost very few people make 10-year deposits. Instead of that, you should have projects like this that are financeable directly from people's retirement accounts, where at least 10 years is a cycle. In fact, if you bring inflation down to 4% a year, that means your money will halve in spending power only once in 18 years. That means today to 18 years later, I know if I have 100 rupees today, I'm going to need to make it 200 just to be able to buy stuff worth 100 rupees today. If I have the visibility, that means 100 rupees today is as valuable half as valuable as it will be 18 years later. This has never been the case in India because we always had 5-10% inflation. We want our money to double every 4 or 5 years. But if you have long-range visibility of inflation, you have long-range visibility of your own spending and long-term requirements. So it gives you more power to the individual to select what longer-term horizon, risk horizon that they can take. You can choose a mutual fund. You can choose maybe the top 500 stocks, Nifty 500 stocks only, so that you don't get into these small caps and all that stuff. Only Indian securities, of course. All mutual funds that you want to invest in, AAA or AA rated bonds only. This can be easily opened up to, in the stock exchange itself. You can buy it, or you can buy it from a third party broker, but only AAA and AA rated bonds. I think the idea over here is that you empower the individual. Now, we've always been nanny states, right? So we always had said, we know better than you what you need for your retirement. I think by and large, this doesn't work. By and large, India knows what it wants. India has a bunch of very, very, very smart people on average, where there's a fringe element that is, let's say, not smart enough. For the not smart enough people, there are also instruments of people like asset managers, mutual funds, or asset managers, and a bunch of other security layers, all of whom can help them manage their money by being an intermediate vehicle that's well regulated. This can also have a rich advisory layer, and we have an advisory concept as well. The advisory layer can actually add benefit. You can buy direct mutual funds off of this. In fact, there's no need for commissions in any of this, so you can only buy direct mutual funds. You can create an advisory layer that helps people build their long-term retirement corpus. So Vanguard as a mutual fund in the US, I think gets us more than 50% of its money, in fact, significantly more than that, from retirement accounts. Because people buy Vanguard funds, which are very low-cost index funds, from their retirement accounts for the most part. So Vanguard has an advisory layer that helps you partake electronically. You can assign Vanguard advisory services as the manager for your retirement funds, and they will give you allocations that say, oh, put so much money here, put so much money there, and your money, retirement money, which is coming in every month because you're putting your part of your salary goes there, gets automatically allocated to these strategies every month without your intervention. This is fantastic because it helps you build inflation plus returns over the longer term. And I think this will change the game because India, I think today has enough financial instruments, has the financial technology of UPI and all of that stuff. In fact, now they're talking about using, so you may not need broker to send money to your broker anymore because UPI request can be used to authorize a transfer from your account at a later stage. So you can say, listen, I want to block 100,000 rupees today and let me buy stocks in the stock exchange. And if I buy only 80,000, please take only 80,000 at the end of the day, whatever you need by 3:30 p.m. And it gets automatically blocked from my account for the day. And then later that amount is taken and maybe a different amount. These concepts allow us to build a much more granular MERA account tomorrow by using the same concept and allowing all of this to happen with meaningful control by you, rather than giving it off to an institution and say, I'm giving you 100,000 rupees, please go and figure out what is great for my retirement. When the person looking at you says, I don't care whether you are risk averse or not risk averse, I'm going to give you the same standardized product that everybody is. So give you more flexibility, give you more power, and tax you as income on the way out. This is an EET product. Exempt at entry, exempt at accrual, and taxed on exit, fully taxed on exit, which I think will be fantastic for India in the longer term, especially if you say that, listen, even if you contribute or your employer contributes, it doesn't matter, it's tax-free at entry.
This sounds quite promising, in the sense. So one thing which kept running in my mind is, what's the counter argument, or perhaps better than counter argument? Who are the people who don't want this, or who feel this is not a good idea or are opposing this? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is to monolithic organizations like NPS and EPFO. They exist because they're this corpus that they're managing. They exist because they get a lot of power from this corpus that they're managing in the first place. I think in general, this power has been given to them over years, and they should not wield this kind of power over the individual. I can't access my retirement funds because EPFO wants one form from an employer I had 10 years ago. Why are my retirement funds blocked because of this? I have very little redressal. I have to, people do fight quite a bit for this. And over time, we're just making these organizations unnecessarily powerful, because now NPS has NPS and EPFO have political power. They can determine what to do with that money and whether this money goes to X or Y and so on. Why should we allow this? I think that's, first of all, a bad idea. But they are the ones who are going to hate it because it's their power that is being reduced because of it. The income tax, of course. The income tax department will be like, excuse me, you don't pay today, but you pay tomorrow. What happens to my today? Right? Because the short-term targets have to be met. So I think here's a leap of faith where you've got lower inflation coming in. You've got government finances that are the best that we've seen for a long time. Of course, government may need to spend more, but the point over here is that the revenues are also robust. I think this is one of those points where having a MERA account, a retirement account, will maybe affect some taxation in the near term, but in the long term, I think this will be a dramatic leap for India's investments and financialization and markets and everything else, because we're at the cusp of becoming a developed economy over the next decade or so. We should start thinking of what developed economies do when they are developed. And it seems like they fund their long-term aspirations through individuals' retirement accounts. And we should be building the same kind of framework for our markets and for our economy as well.
I have to say that does sound like a very nice note to end on. Potential of lower inflation, better government finances, and India on the cusp of becoming a developed economy where we all have access to these amazing long-term investment opportunities. I really hope this recommendation comes through and some of the predictions it's predicated on as well.
Yes, awesome, Shray. I think happy 2023 to you and to everyone. I know we'll come back in the first half of 2023 and hope it's a better year from an economic and political and geopolitical kind of perspective. And it's as good economically for us as well from the stock market perspective.
Thank you, Deepak. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Let's hope that for all of us and for all our investments, we all have a great 2023 that comes up ahead. If you're thinking of starting the new year and getting your finances in order, do consider giving us a visit at capitalmindwealth.com to figure out how we might be able to help you invest your money and help you achieve your financial goals. That's capitalmindwealth.com.